Well, hi, everybody, and welcome to the Cultural Studies podcast, which is also the Culture and Barbarism podcast, videocast, you name it. My name's Toby Miller, and my co-host is Dennis Broe.
Hi, everyone. On my part, welcome to Culture and Barbarism. Rosa Luxemburg had famously said the choice was between socialism or barbarism, but perhaps today what we have is culture and barbarism. This is a podcast in which we explore the politics of culture and the culture of politics. So, Today, we're going to talk about tariffs and regulations in the US and Europe, and particularly as it affects film, and even more particularly as it affects the TV business and the streaming and series business. So, um, Toby, I wanted to make one more point to beat the dead horse. And that's about we had opened up on the podcast talking in the first one about talking about tariffs and Trump's threatening Mexico. And I just wanted to say I love that is every now and then, especially with Mexico, when he's threatening the world with tariffs or dropping the tariffs or whatever, threatens the market with threatening tariffs, then dropping them. He drops the word fentanyl as if he cares, as if this is the reason. Trade, 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 tariffs, reduce taxes, fentanyl. Just a sop to the working class MAGA audience he's in fact, in the process of betraying by, if any of this goes through, raising the prices of all their consumer goods. So I don't know. I just think it's very interesting that every once in a while he doesn't even flesh it out anymore. Hello, Marjorie.
Yeah, I'm
He
so
just
sorry, you guys. I was caught on another meeting, and then here I am. And I'm so sorry, Dennis, because I just seen your very detailed email right now. I don't know what happened with my emails. Of course,
okay.
technology.
That's okay. We're in the process of just beginning the show, and we'll call you in a minute, actually, and we'll give
Oh,
you an introduction. So you have a chance you could spend a few minutes now if you'd like, just reading the email and
yeah.
catching up.
So, I mean, just for brief note of context, so we are both your guests on this show today.
No, Toby, this is a podcast with myself and Toby, and you are our guest today.
Wow.
That's
Okay.
right. It's all on
And
you.
you're gonna need video and audio.
Yes, and we're recording right now. So you have a chance to so we have a little segment to go, and then we'll call you in.
Oh, okay. Not moving. I'm not going anywhere.
Okay. All right. Uh all right. Anyway, we were just talking about fentanyl. Fentanyl.
Wow.
Uh
China, I
so
guess.
Yeah, I just think it's kind of cute the way every once in a while. At first, he started out and he had something to say. We're really trying to stop the fentanyl traffic. He doesn't even bother anymore. He'll just say fentanyl and then go on to whatever he's talking about. I think that's really sort of indicative of what his mood is toward his MAGA audience, also. Anyway, Toby, what do you think?
Well, we're dealing with a person in Donald J. Trump who is quite clearly thought disordered, but at the same time is quite capable of reaching out in the Weberian sense, in a charismatic mode to people. The fact that he can barely make a syntactically credible sentence doesn't matter because his affect speaks to pent-up resentments.
Yep.
Resentments amongst some sectors of the white ruling class in the United States, but especially amongst the white working class and lower middle class. He speaks to people outside cities, people who don't have a huge amount of education, and people who don't have a lot of cultural capital. People who have quite rightly felt disenfranchised by successive
Exactly.
governments in the United States, be they Democratic or Republican in hue, and people who also have felt quite rightly disenfranchised by the so-called Washington Consensus, the neoliberal doctrines of globalization. Now, of course, part of the problem in all of this is the question of human labor. Sorry, Marjorie Pallion, this is the podcat. His name is Chinguri. He's a Basque. He's just moved from Spain with me to Mexico.
He
Chinguri,
must be undergoing culture shock.
he's
I
going through
mean,
a real culture shock.
Yeah, I mean, we always need a PTSD, like pet at some point to just, like remember and don't not being homesick in a way, I guess.
That's so true. So we've got this problem of Trump's capacity to speak very powerfully to the downtrodden or the people who perceive themselves as downtrodden. But this also relates to something that goes all the way back to the first half of the 19th century, when there were massive right-wing anti-immigrant riots, particularly against Italians moving to the United States by Irish-descended folks. And the history that you're both well aware of that really is continuous over almost 200 years. And this is putting slavery to one side of there being this extraordinary white resentment in the United States against anybody who seems to have an opportunity to be different from them or is different from them. And that can be against Jews, it can be against Catholics, and of course, the kind of original sins of the foundation of the country against Native Americans and against African Americans. So, in a slightly long-winded academic way, I think that those are the wings of desire, to coin a slightly more famous filmmaker than anybody here gathered, that Trump has managed to latch onto. And he is speaking a certain truth to people that has a powerful historical and contemporary resonance, and to which, of course, I am completely opposed. But the great irony of, for example, the fentanyl crisis, as depicted by him, is that this is about abjuring Mexico, where I currently am, sending drugs to the United States, whilst happily sending arms to Mexico, where personal possession of them is essentially illegal, and which feeds the terrible violence that afflicts this country as a consequence of the narcos and narco-terrorism. So there is a terrible hypocrisy here, and there is an abject failure on the part of the Democratic Party and the bourgeois media in the United States to point out the legitimate wellspring of resentment as well as the historical bigotry that informs his base.
Yes, that's what we had. That's what you had brought up in our first podcast, and there is a case now, right now, that Mexico has brought before the Supreme Court, accusing the U.S. of shipping arms to Mexico, so that instead of just a fentanyl trade, now you have an extremely violent gang war. And the Supreme Court will hear that case actually, which is kind of quite interesting. Probably won't be covered in the mainstream media, but they will hear the case. Yeah, I just wanted to add one footnote, which is another part of Trump's audience is sort of small businesses. And January 6th, that was the crowd that came to Washington, and they feel that they've gotten the short shrift also from the corporate, and of course, Trump really isn't Trump, while he speaks to the resentment, doesn't speak to the economic position of small businesses in the US, because of course he's just, look at his coronation, it was all oligarchs. So anyway, so we will go on now, and and we will talk about. I'm going to read my little piece on Siri Mania, because uh, Marjorie and I encountered each other at Siri Mania, and this is my encounter of it. And it's a kind of talk about the Series TV Biz. It's called Series TV Biz 2025. Unstoppable AI, Trump's onslaught on industry regulations, and US streamers embedded in Euro production. Now, let's see, I'm going to share the screen because I have some photos here and the thing that I'm going to be talking about. Let's see if I can share. Okay. Yeah, I'm sharing the screen now. Let's see now.
You have a
Okay.
complicated screen, Dennis. I would get a headache from trying to navigate that if it were my screen.
Well, let's see. Okay. All
Everyone
right.
has a mind map, in a way. So I guess it's mind mapping the podcast right now.
Okay. Are you getting the screen now?
Ew.
Okay, good. All right. So let me go on with this. Series TV Biz 2025. This is published in a couple of places, and it's on my Substack called Cultural Politics for Those Who Care. The End of the Boom, Unstoppable AI, and the American Cultural Invasion of Europe. One of the key phrases circulating within the streaming TV series industry is post-peak TV. The boom is over, except for possibly Netflix, one of the few streamers to increase its production budget this year from 17 billion to 18 billion. That was the word from Series Mania in France's Lille, the largest TV festival in the world, which this year screened 48 series from 19 countries with 108,000 professionals and fans participating. It was very large and gets larger every year. TV series production, according to the British statistical agency Ampere, consisted of 587 series in 2024, down from 770 series 2 years before, a decline of 25%. Although the festival received a record number of entries for its various competitions, so it is expanding globally. The Series Mania Forum, a three-day biz summit held during the festival, focused on three challenges to the European TV industry, as laid out by Anne Bouvereau, the festival president. They are cutbacks in financing, which for the European TV model means decreases in government allocations, because what leads in the European sector in television still is public television. Um, um, how to address losing younger viewers to social media, and how to cope with the rapid intrusion of artificial intelligence into the industry. And there's a little thing on the end of peak TV. The end of peak TV or downturn in the business, which has meant a shrinking of not only series, but also episodes and episode length, is, as is often the case in Europe, led by a U.S. downturn in the way that the fallout from the U.S. mortgage collapse in 2008 prompted the European state debt crisis. Hollywood's still struggling to come out of the loss of production due to the COVID lockdown, then experienced the writers and actors strikes, which were about equity for both unions, with the LA fires following hard upon. So it's been sort of, in a way, catastrophe after catastrophe, although I wouldn't call the writers' strike a catastrophe. It was only a slight catastrophe for the producers, not for the actors and the writers. However, all this must be taken with a grain of salt, as Ampere forecast by that 2029, the global streaming business would generate profits of 190 billion, with the next region of exploitation being the Asian Pacific. So when we talk about post-peak TV, we have to understand that this is from the producers, who are talking about making slightly less money. These questions play out against the continually increasing presence of U.S. streamers in Europe. With the U.S. market saturated and subscription growth slow, the major streamers, especially Netflix, Amazon, and Disney, are looking more than ever to Europe to boost profits and are continuing to produce local fare in those countries. Production in Hollywood has moved to such an extent that when the fires hit Los Angeles and the worry was they would shut down shooting, only 2 films were currently being shot there. This was quite an amazing thing because everyone was talking about, oh my God, what about the whole loss of revenue? And it turned out production has really, film production has really moved out of Hollywood, though television production is still centered here. Well, as well as porn production, by the way, which is what I'm researching in the moment in the Valley, or what's sometimes called Silicon Valley. Well, one trend is the broadcastification of streamers, with each attempting to lock up sports events to draw live audiences, and with advertising now being a significant part of their revenue. The other trend is the saturation of the European model by the Americans, with 9 of 10 of the most popular streaming groups now US-based, and 1 of 4 TV channels in Europe now US-owned. The Netflix presentation let the cat out of the bag in terms of how the US streamers plot global domination, when the presenter revealed that the service was less than 50% connected into the households globally and only capturing 6% market revenue, meaning, of course, the company's goal was to be in 100% of households and to capture 100% of market revenue. That is how these people think. Amazon touted its rise in the Nordic countries without mentioning the corresponding fall of the Nordic streamer Viaplay, which failed in its attempt to go global and penetrate the Anglo market, such that Viaplay has become, instead of a global rival, more of a producing studio for the streamers. And that was a very viable European challenge to the streamers, which didn't succeed. Amazon now brands itself as Prime, or as MGM Studios, since its owner, Jeff Bezos, has fallen into ill repute around his championing Trump. As an example of its embeddedness in European production, it cited, and I wanted to show this, Girls of Oslo, who will look like the glamour queens in the Real Housewives of franchise. So That's that's its local production, Girls of Oslo, and you see them and they look like they should be on a Hollywood billboard here in LA. As an example of its global reach, European newcomer Paramount Plus cited NCIS Sydney, an umpteenth iteration of the model imposed on local cultures. Last but not least, an AMC executive explained that the impetus for expanding its Walking Dead franchise to France in its Daryl Dixon series was that a network executive, quote, wanted to see zombies under the Eiffel Tower. Uh, which is interesting. I mean, actually, that was a pretty good series, Daryl Dixon in France, and it really did explore the whole country and use all of it. Uh, all of which brings up the question of regulation, of how the Europeans are coping with this intrusion. One panel host suggested that the point of Trump's European tariffs was to overthrow European digital and television regulation, and we have that host with us today, and that would be a major part of the upcoming tariff negotiation. Europeans have an audiovisual media services directive that suggests, without requiring, that American streamers contribute a percentage of their profits to the country where the series are produced. 14 countries impose these obligations. The percentages start from 1.5, with France's 25% being the highest. It was pointed out that although France has the most stringent rules, while also requiring that a French producer be hired on each American production as a way of absorbing the American system, the regulation has in no way stopped the streamers from producing in France, while the contribution has aided French film and television outlets. So by contributing 25% to French film production, they're not reducing their profit margins to anything substantial. The threat and promise of AI. And the question is AI coming for your job? And I like this little piece. A panel on AI revealed the ways the technology was already being used in the industry to enhance elaborate green screens for documentaries, to analyze character arcs and plot points, and provide custom summaries of series so viewers can catch up quickly. And in dubbing into different languages, an industry in itself in Europe, and a key industry which employs a lot of people, and which, each country has its own, like George Clooney's voice in Italy, and that actor is very famous, so if AI can really duplicate this, it's going to unemploy a lot of people. But what of the loss of jobs? Eric Barmack, the American rep on the panel, boasted that his production company, Wild Sheep Content, had only 5 employees who, with AI, were able to do the work of 100, little realizing that many of the creators in the audience were wondering what becomes of the other 95. He claimed that 80 to 90% of the work in Hollywood is now utilizing AI. He said his fear was not for the industry people who are losing jobs, but for what amounts to a democratization of TV and filmmaking. He pointed to the industry boogeyman, a 16-year-old who sits in his bedroom and turns it into a production house for 2 to 3 minute films, saying that his kids were enthralled with his short form. The audience clapped for his description of a fearful future, but the description itself belies the fact that traditional media outlets are losing control, and more and freer options and opinions are circulating, with the media ecosphere now widening to include not just 16-year-old wunderkinds, but also more direct challenges by activists to mainstream political ideology. Besides post-peak TV, the other most popular buzzwords at the conference were community, escapism or lightness, and women. Community, of course, didn't mean furthering actual communities, but creating digital word of mouth that could be converted into subscriptions. Lightness was the counter streaming execs were proposing to the fact that, as one industry spokesman said, everything is heavy, dark, and so the industry favors, instead of confronting the issues that plague Europe and the world, making a virtue of ignoring them. The emphasis on women was not so much on their liberation as on a recognition that they're driving subscriptions. Underneath these buzzwords is the great fear in the industry of churn, that viewers will float from one streamer to the next and unsubscribe as soon as they have seen the 1 or 2 shows that interest them. In terms of community, an Amazon exec revealed that the company favors unifying Europe into a single market so that investment in each individual company would immediately circulate across the continent, thus proposing a single American-dominated European market. Putting the buzzwords together, the suggestion is that Amazon's predominantly female community should be dedicated to lightness and escapism. That is, given the declining standard of living on the continent, to watching Jeff Bezos fiddle while Europe burns. And that's my little piece on where TV's at. Toby, did you want to comment? Both of us have written about television. Toby has written quite extensively on television regulation, and I've written about television for my book, Birth of the Binge, Serial TV and the End of Leisure.
Well, I think it would be great, actually, Dennis, if you could introduce Marjorie in just a minute. But very quickly, what's worth noting in this context is that back at the end of the Uruguay round of the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, the GATT, that went from 1986 to 1994 with the subsequent emergence of the World Trade Organization, the Punta del Este round of the GATT, there was a big attempt by the so-called Cairns group, Cairns not Can, group of countries, places like Canada and Australia, small in terms of impact, but rich enough to have diplomatic missions around the world, to create a movement of the global South and those wealthy but small countries to try to do something about the protectionism in the area of agriculture on the part of the United States and what's now the European Union. One of the major bargaining points, the things that went on during the end of that round, was Hollywood issues, because Bill Clinton, who had just been elected president, had got a lot of financial support and ideological assistance from Hollywood. And Hollywood wanted more and more access to what was becoming the sort of quasi-single market of the EU, and access for the material that it produced, but also even more access to being able to draw on public policies designed to support French national cinema, British national cinema, German national cinema for US production. Now, all of that ended up seeing, of course, nothing that really worked in terms of small farmers and nothing that really worked for Hollywood. In the end, Clinton ditched them. But it has been the case, as you imply with your account of the conference you were both at, Dennis, that Hollywood has been very successful at utilizing public subvention designed to thwart it, designed to combat it, to provide alternative national cinemas. Here in Guadalajara, Netflix has just opened its own studio. Will it be seeking to make television or film, whatever we call Netflix, that resonates with Mexicans? Mexicans are used to being an import culture as well as an export one. So it will be able to produce what the Spanish call los servis, making Game of Thrones in Spain instead of in Sweden or wherever, because more public money is offered. So just to give that little bit of historical context, on the one hand, this attempt to raid European public funding that's designed to resist Hollywood imperialism has gone on for a long time. On the other hand, because of the crisis that Dennis has so brilliantly laid out for us, technological crisis and political economic one, we're seeing, in a sense, new efforts by Hollywood to look at other sources of revenue, but not revenue in the sense of box office, simply revenue in terms of how to go into profit before you've even sold your film or your television series, as a consequence of being able to raid public subvention. So Dennis, maybe you could introduce our guest, who's been very patiently sitting while we've been having our guy talk.
Yeah, just one little point to add. I think in Hollywood did back Clinton. Hollywood did not back Trump, but you have a different phenomenon. The digital media did back Trump, and they were at his inauguration. And also, digital media and Hollywood have now merged. So they are, so Amazon is the place where they're completely merged. So let us go to our guest. Thank you, Marjorie, for appearing. And let me give you a little introduction. Marjorie Pallion is a moderator and speaker and a regular on France 24.
And many other media. I have to say, actually, here, Dennis, I'm actually more a freelancer now than anything, because just a brief context about me. I've been covering American politics, whatever it is right now, and tech from the very same beginning, back to 2008 during the first Obama campaign, when, there were the storytelling saying that this very first Obama campaign was a very digital one. At what state were digital media at the time. And once I was describing the internet as, like this amazing tool for political marketing, I just paid attention to the donors from Silicon Valley, from the Democratic Party, and just realized there was a huge industry out there, and that maybe at some point digital and politics could merge.
Yes, and they have. And we're at that point. I know Marjorie from having seen her lead lively discussions at Series Mania for several seasons of the conference. Although the panels tend sometimes towards celebrations of the industry, Marjorie's always forthright about bringing up the tough questions and presenting them to the panelists, including this year a grilling of the Amazon rep about what exactly Amazon's intentions in Europe were. This year, on a panel titled Preserving a Virtuous European Model, she suggested that part of the impetus for Trump's tariffs on Europe was to overthrow European regulation, including the directive suggesting but not requiring streamers contribute to the film and TV industry of the country. For the moment, the tariffs are on hold, but the rate originally announced was 15%, and then there was a 90-day freeze on most countries except China. And now they're talking about perhaps China also. But if these tariffs go forward, Marjorie, what might be the effect on the audiovisual, TV, and film industry? And might they, in fact, be an opening salvo in an attempt to curb European regulations at what would be demanded at any negotiation?
So listen, remember, we were having this discussion at the end of March, which seems to be a century from now where we are and when we're actually having this podcast together, all the three of us. And so much is happening over a 24 news cycle. You can literally have one truth getting up in the morning and ending up going to bed with another one. So it's really difficult to keep pace with whatever's happening here. But I think one of the main talking points we're having on stage with those guests at Sears Mania was the fact that perhaps while entering this trade war, digital regulation and audiovisual regulation could be trade-off on, like over this discussion about tariffs. I'm sure President Trump still thinks tariffs are the most beautiful word in the dictionary, but still, there are really great concerns here in Europe that it's definitely a die or live new type of moment for European regulation, especially when it comes to digital. And as you put it really clearly, digital and audiovisual are totally linked. This is very much of the same market right now. So yeah, I mean, we're still trying to cope with this trade war, even though the tariffs are on hold for now, or maybe for 20 days or 30 days. I mean, President Trump was not really clear about that, not only been 40 hours ago. So we're still very much waiting. And within the last 40 hours, actually, the European Union enforced the DMA, the Digital Market Service Act, the Digital Market Act, sorry, on Apple and Meta, fining them with millions, which is not that much compared to the up to 6% of the global money they can actually make. So that is, we're really at this time, at this crossroads, where we're trying to weigh the pros and cons of is it a moment for, like digital regulation to make the proof that, yes, we can stand up to the United States of America.
Yes.
Can I ask you about...
Go ahead, Toby.
Oh, sorry. Marjorie, could I ask you about the culture commerce debate that's gone on all the way to the European Court of Justice for decades, right? Whether these systems of subvention that are national within Europe, but also transnational via the EU, are really there to create industry champions to support producers, or are they really there in order to produce a cultural alternative? Is that debate still live, and what's your perspective?
Oh, that is a very tough question, I have to say. But I get that now we're more trying to use the regulation tool more than anything. And now, I mean, we're 27 states or member states in the European Union. So you could have 27 versions of is culture a market or is culture an art? And this is a debate that has been going on centralist in the very creation of the European Union. And we have, I mean, as state members, to be clear about the definition we want to have. Now, France has been probably one of the most prominent countries in this battle, making clear that we have what we call the cultural exception, and that we want to defend it no matter what. So this is very different. I mean, if you are asking this question to a French producer, I'm pretty sure they would actually stand for the cultural exception more than anything. Now, if you ask this question to an Italian producer, maybe they would actually refer to the Game of Thrones or maybe a Spanish one and say that they want actually American production to enter their market because this is good business. And this has been for a long time now. So yeah, first trying to make, a point here, but also trying to be clear with ourselves as Europeans. Do we want culture to be a market, or do we still want it to be an art? And in the meantime, the discussion we're having, and Dennis was paying attention to at Series Mania, was also to try to make sure that we understand that culture is a soft power, and that in soft power there's power actually, and that we should actually use it as a great tool for leveling up the playing field, and that if we have to stand for culture and the audiovisual industries being a soft power itself, then use this power.
This is like the force de frappe meets l'exception culturelle.
Absolutely, you got it.
Yeah. And France is with the audiovisual media directive, and it's 25%. It's sort of leading in producing funds, which goes back to kind of the way that France, used Canal Plus to invest in its film and television. So you can have a pay per TV, but if you do have pay per TV, you have to pay the state, and that money has to go back to French film and television production. So the
eternal. The debate is definitely on how to finance creation more than anything. So we can put as much regulatory rules, as much as like quota as we want, but in the end, the question is who is going to pay for the creation part of it.
Yes. Yeah. And I think this is a really big difference between the countries in terms of some of them simply would, in a way, kind of want to surrender their cultural sovereignty for the big bucks. And then you have France, which is not only taking the lead in the audiovisual, in the money being required, and also in the thing of putting in a producer in each thing. So that, like the Chinese, when American technology comes into the market, they learn from American technology. It doesn't simply come in and rip them off.
When it comes to the directive itself, I think that, of course, the CNC, which was also giving very interesting facts and figures during this discussion, made the proof that France is championing the AVMS directive here, and that we can actually make profit out of it. So regulation is also a question of business, my friend, at some point. And when we're talking about industrial or digital or economical and cultural sovereignty, well, we're definitely talking about business at some point. And this is not an insult, even though some member states might have, wrapped themselves into any concept of sovereignty and saying that they would be championing this question just because of the values. But yes, I mean, if we have to go and debate about protectionism and actually the United States, and it's not only under Trump administrations that protectionism has been used as a powerful tool. Well, yes, if we have to go into this protectionism debate, we better think as European ourselves how to protect our markets from other industries and other countries entering those markets.
If you go back 200 years, the United States was a net importer of culture, almost all of it from the UK, poor bastards. And there was a hue and cry about this. That was one of the reasons why the United States basically didn't have any interest in what we now call intellectual property or copyright until the 20th century, because it was interested in how it could take a wildly popular author like Charles Dickens, as he was in the middle part of the 19th century, as we all know, and simply republish his work, regardless of its origins economically and its ownership. And that model enabled the United States, prior to the emergence of cinema in France and elsewhere, but especially in France, to set up culture industries thanks to protection. Now, that history is completely forgotten in the United States in terms of cultural policy issues and by Hollywood itself. At the same time, to give you an example from when I used to live in LA, I went to a dinner party with a major attorney for Disney. And I said to her, so on one of my rare outbursts when I lived in the United States of actually showing what I believed, I said, so you guys go all over the world in search of sweetheart deals you can get from taxpayers in other countries, and all across the United States in terms of sweetheart deals you can get from taxpayers in the US. She said, no, we don't. That's a lie. And I've got friends who are producers in Hollywood who will say things like, oh, I went down to Chile the other day. They have great locations and lots of them speak English and wonderful technology. They're really great. And I said, don't bullshit me. You've got all of that in LA. They're offering you public money to fund your TV series. He said, oh, yes, that happens. But that's only part of it. It's very hard to get people in this world to recognize, A, the history of protectionism by the United States, of course, right across industry, and B, the way in which there is this attempt to use the cultural exception in the interests of every kind of streamer or studio imaginable. So there's some sort of public relations campaign that needs to be made to get people in the United States, including policymakers, to wake up and be honest about their history and their dependency.
I just want to make 2 points. One, Michael Hudson, the economist Michael Hudson, has really been talking lately a lot about how did U.S. build up its industrial capacity and exactly what Toby's talking about through regulation and protectivism, which has now become a dirty word because if it's used against the U.S., then it's pejorative and it's negative. But when the U.S. used it to build up its industry, which is always in danger of quashing other industries, then it's a positive. And just to say the other thing that Toby's talking about, yes, production has really left Hollywood, and not only Chile, it's also gone to Georgia because Georgia has it. And I don't mean the country, I mean the state, because Georgia has these unbelievable tax incentives to shoot in Georgia. So anyway, go ahead, Marjorie.
No, but I mean, again, the entire question is here, and the entire debate ends up with the IP. Who is the owner of the IP? And that's definitely what those pieces of regulation in Europe are trying to preserve. And when you're actually a producer and dealing a deal or a contract with Netflix or any other streamers, Amazon, Prime, and name them here, and they're really trying every single time to retain the IP, and that's a treasure chest here. So how can we actually not get rid of our European IPs, that's the first. And second, if we're going back to the reason why streamers entered the European markets, it was because the subscription numbers were just plateauing in the US, Canada, and Latin America, and that they wanted more consumers, which is, a very basic trade strategy here, but which works. So, hey, how to have growing numbers when it comes to subscribers? Let's reach out to Europe because maybe here we have a market that we can enter and get more subscribers from. And B, because especially with Netflix example, they very rapidly found that compelling stories are for some reasons, sometimes local ones, and that from local brands and local stories, you can basically grow them into international global hits. So that was the main reason why Netflix, for instance, and I remember this quite clearly because I was actually for France 24 at the time, covering the launch of Netflix in France, which was a huge controversy, as you can imagine, because every here in the business was seeing Netflix coming with this, like American boots on the ground and stepping foot on European soil and trying to disturb and to disrupt the entire cultural market and audiovisual market here in France. Well, guess what? We're a few years, later, 10-ish, 11 years after the very first, Netflix entering the French market, and I guess we've reached some kind of compromise now.
Yeah, I just wanted to say for our viewers who might not be TV addicts, IP is intellectual property, and it's very,
Yes.
very important. It's the thing that everyone wants to control. And the other word is Windows, because now Marjorie's pointing to these kind of productions between streamers and television series, and a big question is who gets the window, which is who gets the property, who gets to put it on first. Then there's a secondary window, who gets that property. And if you own the IP, you negotiate with this. If you don't, you don't. And
And
so
so
this
on.
is a really key issue.
And that's what you call a French paradox, Dennis. Because the windowing and the view windows are specific to France, actually. You won't have the same, what we call media chronology in other state members in Europe.
One of the things that the streamers are looking at, because they're worried that eventually the problem they ran into in the Americas will apply everywhere, they'll just run out of new subscribers, is that their Ponzi scheme, which is constantly to get more and more subscribers, will break down, that there will be regulations enacted that make it harder for them to get subvention for their production elsewhere. So their other strategy is advertising. At the moment, that provides, as I understand it, a tiny percentage of their money. But if you look at some productions that are currently being offered with your subscription to Netflix or Amazon, they're clearly being edited with a view to the insertion of advertising. Take Bosch Legacy, the sort of end of the Harry Bosch series on Amazon. The first seasons, when he was still a police officer, were not cut with a view to commercials being inserted. The latest series, the legacy ones, are cut absolutely with space for commercials. So I think this is the next attempt to take money away, this time from commercial TV networks, by saying to people, your subscription costs can go right down, a bit like the tiered model in the old days of cable in the United States, but you're going to get lots of advertising. I wonder whether either of you have, or both of you have views on that possibility of commercials becoming more and more central to what streamers do.
Well, I think it's so central right now, advertising. There was a panel at Series Mania on advertising, but it's now called, it now has a name. It's called broadcastification. In other words, the streamers who had started out being completely different. We are not going to be like network TV. Remember HBO's model, it's not TV, it's HBO. Well, Max, even which owns HBO and AT&T behind Max, are now using advertising all of the time, and it's a big part of what they do. And the other big part of what they do, something we covered last time, is sports. They are locking up sports networks and sports events. So you think you're going to watch an event on network TV, and you won't anymore, because Amazon is now broadcasting the event that you wanted to watch. Because the other thing they want is live audiences. That's the thing they can't have, and so that's another area that they're sort of encroaching on. Anyway, go ahead, Marjorie.
No, absolutely. I was literally, saying yes to every single argument you were stating here. But the thing is, I mean, again, we're probably a little more ahead than 10 years after the very first time Netflix entered the European Union through France's first launch. And what we're seeing here over the past decade, that we have broadcasters looking more and more like streamers, and streamers looking more and more like broadcasters. So at the end of the day, we could say that both models are going to merge in some way. But I mean, I'm not talking about a business merging here. And that's, again, the real question, because while we are having all those discussions over European regulation, over business models, is again to find better ways to finance creation. So this is an entire question of business models out there. So what do we want for the next decade? And where do we want to reach wider audiences? To tell more compelling stories, because again, this business in the end ends up with no viewers, no content. You don't have anyone to watch actually the really great stories or those live events you want to produce and you want to give them to consume. That, I mean, you don't have any viewers, you don't have any business model. at the end of the day. So again, this is a very simple equation to me. But now we have to figure out as viewers, because I mean, we do have a power. I mean, and I'm pretty sure that you guys are also viewers out of 24 hours in your lives. You can be journalists, you can be producers, you can be streamers, but you're also viewers at some part of the day. So what model would you like to subscribe to?
Well, part of the problem from my perspective is that in the Americas, for example, if you're interested in watching football, by which I mean real football, sorry, Dennis, like association football, if you want to watch, the Spanish League, La Liga, Liga, Serie A, the English Premier League, you can end up, depending on your fetish, as it were, having to take out subscriptions to numerous different services, right, Dennis? It's not as though you can simply say, I like football and I'm going to subscribe to this, which you could do in the United States 15 years ago through the Fox Soccer channel. Now you're obliged to pay lots of different entities in order to get the coverage. And this is one of the ways in which, in a sense, getting to your point, Marjorie, consumer power is actually about consumer exploitation. Where you have a product that people are really committed to, and it could be romance, or it could be sports, or it could be art, but sports is the one that draws in wealthy people, often wealthy men, right? I mean, comparatively wealthy men. I don't mean the super rich, but affluent people within the society. Then you simply carve them up and make them take out numerous subscriptions. There's no way of, in a sense, having consumer sovereignty when you have a product that everybody wants and that you can sell through these different windows. So I really take your point, and I agree that we as viewers are important, but the idea that we have power to change things, I think, is actually quite problematic.
Yeah. And another point actually on the advertising war that one of my guests was making on stage at Here's Mania, Rodolphe Belmer, the chairman and the CEO actually of the TF1 group, was as being a legacy media and broadcaster and entering the mainstream streaming business was okay. I mean, now the other power part of it is definitely up to brands. Do they want to invest their ads money into a platform, or do they want to invest it into a legacy media that is checking its sources, that is doing its job well in a way? And so that's also where the front line is heading.
Yeah. It's interesting too, just to back up a step and to say, this is television, this is culture in the neoliberal era. In other words, in the previous Fordist era, we had free television. You turned on the television, everyone turned on the television, it was free. You had to endure the ads, but it was free. The whole thing now is to privatize television, get it behind walls, not only it started out with films. Lots of films now have all been locked up by the streamers. So their catalogs are locked up, so that everything is locked up. And as Toby says, now sports are locked up within different ones. How many companies can you subscribe to? Now that they're divvied up. But again, this whole kind of shift of getting consumers from accepting the idea that something they used to get for free, they now have to pay for, and saying, well, that they've now shifted the thing to, well, okay, how do I get the best bang for my buck? When you didn't have to pay before. It's a major, major shift too.
Absolutely.
So,
well,
sorry, go ahead, Dennis. Go ahead, Dennis.
No, I was just going to say, if you have a point, go ahead, Toby, and then maybe we'll wrap up.
Well, Marjorie, I wanted to ask you a slightly personal question, but not hugely personal.
Not too personal, I guess.
It's not too personal, but it's about when you grew up, when you were growing up. What did the United States mean to you in terms of film, television culture?
Interesting. Well, I guess so. I was born in the 80s. I'm one of those person here. Yeah. So I guess, I mean, being a teen in Europe and especially in France in the 90s and very beginning of 2000 was more actually to get on board with American shows such as Friends, or those type of show that you would actually be able to watch on free television and broadcasters in France. So I mean, I grew up analog, guys. I'm one of the few who can still say that nowadays. So I definitely, my childhood and part of my teenage years were analog, no phones, no whatever. It didn't exist at the time. And when I turned 17, I had my very first phone, which wasn't smart. It was a Nokia, and we were playing Serpentine. That was the only thing you could do, and just call your mom and your friends. So I get that. I'm pretty happy that I did, because I mean, I didn't have to leapfrog to the digital world, and of course I grew up, and this is probably more personal on the part of my answer here, but. I also had the ability to construct my identity, my personality, and my pop culture or media culture, not out of a digital phone, which is very different in the way that now how I'm consuming media, how I'm consuming sources, information, or entertainment is very, very different. But I do remember that when I grew up and when I was a teenager here in Europe, I didn't have access to this huge window of mainstream culture. And now the way I see it is probably the more global we're growing, the more local we want to consume our news, our stories, and our informations.
Thank you, Marjorie. And I wanted to ask Dennis a question as my last contribution.
Okay.
If I could.
I just wanted to add something, which is growing up, which is I was watching the Batman series from 1966 last night with Julie Newmar as Catwoman. Yes, and so I grew up deeply analog. So yes.
My question for you, Dennis, was what part French culture played in your growing up, in terms of French film, French feminisms, French theory, as it's called in the United States, that sort of influence.
Well, later French theory was really, really important. Of course, it as it is for everyone. Growing up for me, it was more British. It was more British culture. That was something different. And my favorite show was The Avengers. And The Avengers was a show at the same time as Batman, with the pop culture kind of thing, and it showed that there was this whole other world that was very different from the American world, with John Steed and Emma Peel. And yeah, so.
And what about you, actually? Because we're dying to have your answer.
Well, I guess in my case, I was living in different countries. And so there were different influences on me as a child. I grew up in India, the US, Britain,
Wow.
Australia. And I got a lot of very different television, but probably the analogic world was dominant for me. And I guess the public service tradition classically associated with Western Europe of arm's length, relative independence from the state was the model for me. And I did not think of commercial television as free. I really did think that it was an imposition on my time to have these people selling clothes and cars. So I felt as though I was paying somehow. I didn't have the sophistication to realize that what was being sold to advertisers was my attention. I didn't have that logic, but the Dallas Smythe insight. But I was definitely influenced by the public service tradition. And I saw France, getting onto that topic, as the place of art cinema, but art cinema that was deeply influenced by and deeply respectful of Hollywood. Whether it's Charlie Chaplin or Jerry Lewis or film noir, named, of course, by French critics, and thinking about the people that we idolized, Jean-Luc Godard, perhaps foremost among them, but others too, from France and from Spain. Claude Chabrol would be another, but also any
Truffaut.
number of critics and scholars. François Truffaut, thank you. His book with Hitchcock, for example, as well as his filmmaking. The fact that you could be super critical of Hollywood, but also love it and provide alternatives to it that troped it. To me, this was one of France's great, great contributions to world culture. You didn't have simply to damn Hollywood, tar it with a brush as rubbish or as mind control, but nor did you have to accept its attempt to sell so-called US values. I felt that that was a kind of magical mélange that France provided, and that it had an influence on lots and lots of great Hollywood directors, producers, writers, and actors. So.
But to your point, actually, on commercial television, back in, I think it was by the end of the 90s, very beginning of the 2000s, one of the previous CEO of the TF1 group called that available brain time. Now, guess available brain time is not on television anymore. It's online. So that's also why you're seeing this war over advertising eating up, like literally, between streamers, between online platforms, and what we are still calling legacy media and broadcasters.
Yes.
Well, Dennis, you and I are legacy media here. We don't take advertising.
Yeah, as was pointed out, that the available brain time, also the other competitor is simply other forms of social media, Facebook. All of those are competitors now too, and you know, as they was remarked at Series Mania in the opening remarks, these are serious competitors to, you know, ABT, available brain time. I guess we'll soon get it, abbreviated. Yeah.
But getting back to our discussion on business models, now the problem is those platforms are getting the money out of your data, basically. I mean, the way Web 2.0 was designed and business modeled is basically to make their money on your personal data. And that is probably one of the very first time that your piece of European regulation was really effective in the way that it made a lot of pedagogy out of consumers. The RGPD, or the GDPR actually, piece of regulation, which is the global data protection of European consumers. That's the very first time that actually European regulators made clear that they were here to protect consumers' data and consumers' lives, which is very different from other pieces of regulation, because sometimes we can have this debate over and over and over again, is regulation preventing innovation from happening, or is it reverse? And you know, this is the egg and the hen type of question. And I guess also this is one part of the new strategy of the Trump 2.0 administration that Vice President Vance made very clear when he stepped foot on European soil a few months ago. It was, of course, during the AI Action Summit in Paris, but also at the intelligence conference in Munich, and that it literally said, no regulation on my big tech guys. Yes. If not, you will actually see what a US power can do. And this is very much where the debate is actually heading now. So again, to catch up with the very beginning of our conversation here, discussion here, we are at crossroads when it comes to regulation, whether digital, whether on the audiovisual sector. And the big question here is, can we actually, again, make the case that we are a power, even a soft power, but that we do measure that with great powers come great responsibilities.
Well stated, Marjorie. I just wanted to make one more point, given what Toby said. You know, we had the earlier thing on television where they're out for your attention span through advertising, but now we've moved forward and now they're out for your entire personality, not just for your attention span. That's what the big digital companies are doing. They're selling the whole person. They've captured it and they're selling it. They're not just interested in your attention span for the hour, you know. Anyway, thanks so much, Marjorie.
Thanks for having me, guys.
It was really wonderful. And see you next year at Series Mania, I think.
Of course. I mean, anytime.
Okay, so long.